Welcome to our monthly membership meeting. As everybody knows, normally in January, we have a field trip, and we had planned one with the city of Dallas for the new Vickery Meadows Library, which is the latest and greatest with lots of renewable energy and conservation features. But as you also know, Omicron reared its ugly head, and we were not able to hold the in-person meeting as we had hoped. And that has been rescheduled to the month of March right now, hoping that the Omicron will be significantly reduced to allow for perhaps a limited number or perhaps unlimited number of attendees, but we're hoping that come March of 2022, we will be able to have that substituted in as our field trip. First of all, Happy New Year to everybody joining us, and thank you for being here. We truly appreciate your participation. James, can you put up the agenda for this morning so that everybody can look at it? Thank you. We want to thank our sponsors from the solar tour. Do you have the slide for that one, James? That includes the city of Dallas. Dallas College was our main sponsor. Skygate Solar, Sustainable Systems of Texas, the Green Source, DFW have always been a great supporter to publicize all of our meetings and all of our events. The Fort Worth Star Telegram, Restorative Farms, the DFW Solar Tour partner, Sierra Club, 350 Dallas, the Tesla Owners Group, the Climate Reality Project, another one of our sponsors, the North Texas Electric Auto Association, and the Dallas Electric Club. We want to thank them for being our sponsors, both for the Dallas Solar Tour and our partners. James, can you go back to the agenda? Thank you. We will have the first 15 minutes or so as our business portion, and then our presenter, Doug Lewin, who is a fantastic presenter, will join us and make his presentation. Lisa, do you want to give the membership an update on where we are on membership?
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Magel. I'm the membership coordinator for NTREG, and I want to welcome everybody here today. I see a few names I haven't seen before, so welcome to new folks as well. As you know, all of NTREG's meetings are free and open to the public because we're a 501c3. We exist to inform and educate people about renewable energy and energy efficiency. That being said, we do have some expenses. You know, we have to pay for Zoom accounts when we get to meet in person again. Hopefully it will be better at our former meeting place, the Midway Hills Christian Church. We give them a little donation every year to thank them for the space. So we have coffee, we have some expenses. So if you are interested in joining, we have an individual level of membership that's only $20 a year. You can go to the NTREG's donate page and do that online. Many of us also are members of our mothership, the Texas Solar Energy Society, and also the American Solar Energy Society. And a convenient way to join those, if you're interested, is to go to the Texas txses.org website. You can join the Texas ASIS, the American Solar Energy Society, and NTREG all on their page as well. And if it's not in the cards for you to pay money, that's fine. We just want to educate people and make sure that people have a place to find out about solar and renewables and energy efficiency. But that's it. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you, Lisa. to bring the membership up to date, you all may recall that this past year we undertook an internship program thanks to a terrific donation from our mothership, the Texas Solar Energy Society, who in turn got that grant from the Metals Foundation. And we had 2 interns that were placed with different entities, in particular with solar companies in the fall. One of those interns has actually secured a full-time position with a solar company as a result of his internship. Terrific young man, and we're happy to report that to you. In addition, our other intern, the entity where they interned has agreed to renew their internship for the spring this year. So starting this month, that intern's going to resume their internship duties with that entity. And that intern is actually also working with NTREG now to bring what that intern calls turn the block green. And they're preparing to bring in utility companies, solar companies, environmental companies like Sierra Club, NTREG, and others, food trucks, a DJ, and have a big old renewable energy type party in June of this year. So we will keep you updated on the progress of that planned event for this year. I know that last time people had also asked about resuming in-person meetings. As you know, Omicron has really turned us upside down again, but we are working with the church where we have met for the last 10 years to gather from them when they are going to be reopening and when and what their requirements are going to be to keep everybody safe and healthy, so that we can also start planning how we resume our meetings in person. Because we have had such a successful tenure with this format, the virtual format, we want to make sure we don't lose it. So we're trying to get help with any member in particular who may already know how to do this, how we live stream our membership meetings when they go to in person. So we have to work on that. And we have to basically get ourselves back together to our routine of what we used to do when we had our in-person meetings, including not the least of which was to make sure we know where our coffee machine is, so that we can have coffee for you at 10 o'clock every morning during our meeting. So please watch out for that. Know we're working on that, and that we hope sometime late spring to no later than this summer, we can start resumption of our in-person meetings, but not let go of our virtual meetings so that we can have greater participation. Thank you very much. And with respect to what the other thing we do during our meetings is have announcements so that we can each share with each other projects, events, information that's going on that is beneficial to all our members and our guests. So if any members have any announcements they wish to make, please raise your hand and I will call on you so that you can make your announcement. I don't see. Susan Alvarez, you raised your hand. Yes, ma'am.
2 real quick things. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. One is that the city's new environmental commission, of which there are some NTREG members involved with respect to the technical advisory and the commission itself. They're having a meeting this Friday, the 14th. The agenda includes preliminary discussion of updates to our green building code. It includes our equity plan, some preliminary discussions relative to batch plant sightings, And then also some discussions on the pending standing environmental health committee. So it will be via, it's a hybrid format meeting. And you can get the link to join it, I believe, from the city secretary's site. The other thing that I wanted to let you know is many of you may know that I'm on the authors team for the 5th National Climate Assessment. I wanted to let you know that they are opening comments right now for the zero order draft, which is basically an annotated outline of things to be covered in this 5th assessment. I can send the link once I find it, but there are a series of virtual open houses that will be held during the months of January and February. As your schedule allows, I would suggest tuning in. This is, in my opinion, really important, really critical work. And it's highly dependent upon the input that is received by residents, expert and otherwise. So that is one of the things that this year's assessment is doing that I think is really important and good, is they are including traditional environmental knowledge. They are also including a specific effort to frontline communities, what their concerns are because of those communities' likelihood of being adversely impacted by climate. So I'm happy to forward the links, but I wanted to give you a heads up that this was happening because I know there are a lot of members of NTREG that could and should have an interest and could and should have a voice in this process. Thanks, Rosa.
Thank you, Susan. Any other member wishing to make an announcement? Raise your hand so I can recognize you. Okay, not seeing any other hands raised. If any of our guests have an announcement they wish to make, please raise your hand now so that we may recognize you and you may have the opportunity to share your information with us. I don't see any hands raised. Now, the DFW Climate Reality Project is one of those organizations that we try to work hand in glove with. And I see Molly is on the line here. Molly, do you want to make an announcement about the Climate Reality Project?
No, I don't have any special announcements this month.
Okay, well, just as a, thank you, Molly. Just as a reminder, they do meet the 3rd Saturday of every month from 1 to 3 p.m. And I know many of our NTREG members attend that. So we're highlighting that and hoping that you will find time to attend their meetings as well. That's all we have, unless anybody else has something that I may have missed. Oh, I do have, just to follow up on Lisa on the membership, NTREG is a member of the Amazon Smile charities that you can donate to. So every time that you buy something through Amazon, if you go through the Amazon Smile, you can donate a few pennies out of your purchase to NTREG, and that would be greatly appreciated by NTREG. The other thing is, please remember, and I know we've been announcing this now for a couple of months, we have elections coming up for the board in January and February of this month, of this year. And we desperately need some of you, especially some of you who have been longtime members like Paul and Ann Whiteman, not to single you out, but you're very cherished members of this group. Please look at the board positions that are coming open. Please consider donating more of your time to NTREG by participating on the board. That's all I have, and unless somebody else wants to raise their hand. Yes, sir.
Hey, this is Ryan.
Yes, sir.
I'll echo what you just said. And from my personal experience on the board over the past 2 years, it's been an amazing experience working with this group and advocating for our mission. clean energy and sustainability in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I think that's important to everyone on this call. And, you know, the organizations, you know, it's forward thinking, and you know, the board is looking for forward thinking people as well. And if anyone is able to volunteer their time to serve as an esteemed board member of the North Texas Renewable Energy Group, I know it's been an amazing experience for me. And you know, the opportunity is there, and I would certainly encourage anyone to reach out to myself or others on the board to really learn more about it. Whether you've been involved before, I'm sure the organization has changed over the years, or are looking to get involved in the future, please feel free to reach out. I'll put my email in the chat here, and would love to speak with anyone about this going forward. So my spiel, back to you, Rosa, and thank you.
Okay, is there anybody else who I've missed that had raised their hand? If not, let's go back to our program.
Rosa, I just want to make a quick comment.
I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Go
No, I
ahead.
didn't raise it. I apologize. I just wanted to bring everyone's attention to the fact that we do have a speakers bureau. And if you have any location or an opportunity that someone wants to hear about renewable energy and solar, give us a call and we'll provide a speaker. So I just wanted to let you know that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. So let's turn to our program. I want to personally thank Mr. Doug Lewin for graciously agreeing to make this presentation to us. It is extremely timely. It is something that has been on all our minds since February 2021, right after Valentine's Day, because we all went and experienced the freeze that unfortunately resulted in the death of more than 200 of our fellow Texans. Let me just say, Doug is a nationally recognized energy expert, particularly on the electric grid, renewable energy efficiency, demand response, utility regulation, and pollution reduction. I won't get into his whole bio because it would take a lot of time that I know he wants to get right into the meat of his presentation, power of, by, and for the people. But I will say that not only is he an expert, Doug has also worked at the Texas legislature for 5 years as a legislative aide, primarily on energy, environment, and climate issues for 3 different elected officials in the House and Senate. He knows of what he speaks, and not to leave out his private experience. He founded Stoic Energy in 2018, and he's previously led government and regulatory affairs work for CLEAResult, as well as the executive director of SPEER, which most of you know that is South Central Partnership for Energy Efficiency as a resource. Doug, I don't want to take any more of your time. I can't tell you how grateful we are. And Doug, welcome to NTREG. Welcome to North Texas virtually. And again, take it away. The floor is yours.
Rosa, thank you so much. You guys can hear me okay? And somebody give me a thumbs up if you can see the slides on the screen.
Yes,
we're
sir.
good. Thank you so much for the opportunity to do this. I have been obviously, you know, tracking and involved in a lot of the things that have happened since the storm, and this was a great opportunity to kind of pull my thoughts together on where we're at right now, and I'm happy to share those thoughts with you. I will say, in regards to the word expert, I am expert in some things. As I have been learning more and more since what happened in February, I feel like less of an expert every day as I'm learning more about this complicated energy system. I know each of you on this call have expertise and experience, and I'm looking forward to getting to know y'all and hopefully getting more involved with your group. Thank you for all y'all do. You guys have a really important role in the ecosystem there in North Texas for clean energy, sustainable energy. Really appreciate everybody on the call, and appreciate you spending part of your Saturday thinking about these things that are so important.
Doug,
All right,
I'm sorry
so,
to
yes,
interrupt you right off the
please.
bat. I forgot to remind people to please hold their substantive questions until after Doug concludes his presentation. If there are acronyms that Doug uses, please that you don't know, please let us know, and we will ask Doug to explain those. But otherwise, please hold your questions, put them in the chat box, and we will get to them after Doug concludes his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosa, for that. Yeah, if I say, whether it's an acronym or if I just say something that is just confusing or not clear, if you have a question for clarity, you can drop that in the chat or direct message to Rosa or Michael. I believe, Michael, you'll be watching the chat as well, and they'll jump in and ask for a clarification. But we will have enough time towards the end, 30 to 40 minutes, I think, for Q&A and discussion or something along those lines as far as the time. So looking forward to those substantive questions, but please do hold them to the end and we'll talk about them then. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and jump in. We're gonna do a couple different things here today. Here's kind of the flow of how this presentation will go. We're going to start with kind of talking about this fundamental question of why. Why are some of the changes that have happened? Why have they happened? And why are we looking to make some of the additional changes? And I want you to think about this, and I'm going to ask you in a few minutes, don't do it yet, but to put some of your answers to why in the chat so you can start thinking about that. But don't do that yet because I want to tee it up a little better. We're going to go into what happened in February. I think it's very important. Whenever we are, especially considering major changes to systems that affect everybody's lives, that we understand what the root causes of the problem were. So we're going to look at that. And then we're going to look at what's been done since. There has been some significant steps that have been taken to prevent future outages. I don't think it's enough, and we'll talk about that as well. That's kind of where we'll go from there, is what's been done and what remains to be done. The list of what remains to be done is not exhaustive, but in my presentation today, it's a pretty long list. So get comfortable, get your coffee or your tea or brunch or whatever and settle in. There's a lot that is left to be done. This is something I often say when I'm talking to the public or press or folks that I work with or whatever, is there is no way that these problems, as large as they were, could be solved in a matter of months. This is going to take years. And frankly, I'm not sure there is ever a point at which we will all just say, great, mission accomplished, job done. We can always make our energy systems more resilient and achieve otherwise. So let's talk about why for a minute. Many of you may be familiar with Simon Sinek. He wrote a book that I liked a lot called Start With Why. And I think it is just a fundamentally great thing to be grounded in, no matter what you are doing in life, is to take a step back and ask the question very clearly: what problems are we trying to solve? Why are we trying to solve those problems? So I want you to start thinking about this in the context of changes to our energy systems. Why would we make those changes? I want to know what your whys are. Start thinking about that, and I'm going to ask you to drop them into the chat in a minute. But I want to just start with a why that I think is fundamental for everybody. And I can't just, Michael, if you would give me a thumbs up, you can see the slide that says why number one, protect people. Okay, just within the Zoom thing, you can't see that it's actually advancing. So why number one, protect people. This tweet from Donna Howard the other day, she's a state representative from Austin, and this tweet just really kind of stuck with me, and I kind of took it to heart. And I'm going to do this from now on, is to actually start any discussion with, hey, there was a massive loss of life. So unfortunately, Texas Health and Human Services Commission released this report on December 31st, on New Year's Eve. 246 people, they revised the death estimate upward. I put this BuzzFeed article here too, and when this presentation gets posted later, all of the links will be there for you to look at. But BuzzFeed did this analysis that looked at death records across the state and compared that to previous years. And without getting into, I've looked at this quite a bit because I wanted to really understand if their number of 750 was more accurate than the 200. And I think it is, because many of our counties don't even have, Harris County obviously has a medical examiner and all sorts of different expertise. Most of your North Texas, Dallas and Tarrant do, but something like over 200 counties just don't have much expertise to make a call as to whether or not hypothermia was the actual cause of death or was it something else. So when you compare the death records year over year, it really looks like we lost more than 700, probably about 750 Texans in February. And we need to start every conversation with this, and we all need to level set. And I'm not suggesting anybody isn't, but I just think it's an important thing to keep in mind that the fundamental why is to be protect people. And I think it's important to actually put faces to this, right? I mean, to put stories to this. I think this is one story. Again, there's hundreds of these stories, but this man, Benny Boatwright from Abilene, was about 60 years old, froze to death during the storm. This is a picture of his widow she was featured in the New York Times a couple of weeks ago. But there's just heartbreaking stories all over the state, right? The veteran who was on oxygen and his medical, his life was dependent upon medical equipment. When the power went out, he had to go out to his car to try to power his oxygen. He died in his car. Veteran of 60-something years old. A young boy in the Houston area, 11 years old. Many people died of carbon monoxide poisoning. Again, all of these just completely preventable deaths. These did not need to happen. The work of ProPublica and Texas Tribune was just phenomenal on that. And I encourage people to take a look at that. And I will say here, public service announcement, if you have a generator, a lot of people have bought generators in the last year, make sure you know how to operate it safely. It cannot be brought inside your house. These are things that the communication with the public has not been good at all on, and we've got to get better at. This I thought was really interesting. New York Times journalist Jack Healy traveled to Dallas after the storm, looked at the damage in 3 different people's homes, wrote sort of a long story about that. There's not a great image for this because it's a podcast, but on December 31st, the New York Times Daily ran an update on that story. And I think, a number 2 why, number 1 is to protect life, but I think number 2 is to protect homes and buildings, and, people's property that they have invested so much of their lives and their earnings into, the damage from this, right? We know now with the insurance lawsuit that just happened in the last week that there were about $10 billion in claims paid out by insurance companies. The Federal Reserve Board of Dallas estimates that the damage across the state was in excess of $100 billion. So this is another fundamental why, and I would encourage folks to listen to this podcast. It's heartbreaking to hear these stories of people that were out of their homes for a year, were unable to pay for. There was a woman interviewed in this podcast who was only just in the last month, just before Christmas, able to get back into her home because the damage in February is so extensive and because she did not have the means to repair her house. And the fact that the state of Texas has made no financial assistance available, the federal government has, the state government has made 0, the number is 0 financial assistance for people whose homes were damaged. That is a real problem. So that is a why. I would love for y'all to put into the chat what are some of the other whys. I've got a long list of why, and the question is, why would we change the energy system? I think 2 things we can all agree on: protect life, protect property. But what are some of the other reasons why we would want to change our energy system? And I want to come back to these at the end in a discussion, in a Q&A. And the reason I'm asking this question is because I think that the whys of the general public are not very aligned with the whys of state leadership. And we're going to talk about that as I go into this presentation and what's been done, and some of the market design changes and things like that are being contemplated. They're answering a why that might be very different than yours. So if you would put those into the chat, and hopefully Rosa and Michael, we have the ability to then capture those chats for later on, that would be great.
We do have
Um,
that ability.
Awesome, thank you, Rosa. So so what happened? Let's start there. Like I said, we'll go through this kind of what happened, what's been done, what's left to be done. But it really is very important what caused these outages, the loss of life, the damage to property. I want to start here. Communication is so important. And what we had in the advance of the storm last year was a failure to communicate. What we had was, I've got the governor's picture up there. It wasn't just the governor, it was the Public Utility Commission, it was the Railroad Commission, it was ERCOT, it was the Texas Department of Emergency Management, it was local governments, it was private industry, it was me, it was all of us. It was a collective failure. We all failed to communicate to the public what was about to happen. And that is, so there's one thing about ascribing blame. There's another thing that is, let's make sure this doesn't happen again. And what I am terrified about is that we are repeating the same mistakes again. When we get guarantees that there will be no outages from anybody, that is not helpful. There are no guarantees in this world, particularly around things like extreme weather, particularly in a world where the climate is changing rapidly, and we are only beginning to understand what climate change means to weather patterns. This makes me angry. We should be communicating clearly with people. There is too much at stake. And of course, there is a possibility there will be outages. I've been very honest about this. I think there have been improvements made. I think if there are outages this winter, they will not last as long. They will not be as deep, but there is absolutely a chance that there could be outages. On February 13th, this, according to the New York Times, 2 days before millions lost electricity, it was less than that. It was less than 36 hours before the power went out. Governor Abbott at a press conference said, quote, "We do as a state have the ability to ensure we do not run out of power." That was wrong. We did run out of power. 2 months ago, he said, "I can guarantee the lights stay on." This is not a credible claim. And I don't believe it is a political thing for anybody to say, please don't listen to that. Please take reasonable precautions to keep yourself and your family and your community safe. What does that mean? Have enough water, have enough canned food, have some kind of a backup power source. You know, it means a lot. Seal up the cracks in between your window and your wall so that you've got a better thermal envelope. There's lots of things you could do, but these things are not being communicated. Another thing would be, if you have a generator, make sure you've learned how to operate it safely before it's 10 degrees outside in freezing conditions, when you're cold and scared and not thinking clearly. These kinds of messages need to be promulgated from the top to the bottom. Top of state leadership, federal leadership, all the way through to local governments and to us talking to our neighbors. This is absolutely critical. And I fear that we have not gotten better at communications. And I think there's a lot of evidence to support that claim. Let's talk about what else caused this damage. So reason number one why we had the outages was that the gas supply froze. This is controversial in some quarters, but I want to be real clear, and I always want to point back to data, evidence, and definitive sources on these kinds of things. You should not believe me on this. You should not believe anybody except for the organizations that are tasked to produce the definitive reports, to do exhaustive investigations, to wake up every day for months and go to sleep at night every day for months, thinking about what caused this, to overturn every loose piece of evidence, to interview everybody involved, and to put together the comprehensive record. Our society is built on a shared understanding of fact. And when there is a plane crash, we call in the National Transportation Safety Board. The National Transportation Safety Board does an exhaustive investigation. They tell us the reason for the crash and how to make sure that crash never happens again. It would be unthinkable for an airline to say, nope, the NTSB was wrong. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation is the equivalent of the National Transportation Safety Board. They produced a report and they told us that the two main reasons why we had outages were gas supply froze and thermal power plants broke down. Gas supply froze in advance of the power outages. We know this particular chart, and there's another one, it got too busy, so I couldn't put it up there, but the one for February 15th basically just takes a line and moves it one here. This is before, but the February 14th, there were no outages on February 14th. Look at how much gas was out. Yellow are voluntary shut-ins. Voluntary shut-ins means this is the same as, and by the way, should there be another freeze, we all should do this. Hopefully we all know by now, where is the water shut off out of the street? I learned the hard way when I woke up in the morning on February 16th and there was water on my first floor and I had to go to a neighbor and say, where's my water shut off? Now I know where it is. Gas operators know where their water shut off is, and this yellow bar is when they actually shut down their entire operations in advance of a freeze. The pink section here are well freeze off. So a huge, and then you've got many of these like that are multiple different things and they couldn't say it was just one thing. That would be the orange, but freezing was certainly a part of those two. We see that there were massive freeze offs on the gas supply system. Now, some of the things that the Texas Oil and Gas Association, the Railroad Commission said consistently at the hearings were that it was the power outages that caused gas to go out. It is false to say that power outages were the only thing that caused gas to go out, or even the primary thing that caused gas to go out. It is not false to say that power outages made the disruptions in gas supply worse. We ended up in a downward spiral. But make no mistake, there was gas going offline as far back as February 10th. That continues, you can see from this chart. Here's February 10th right here. It increased each day before there were ever power outages. Half of the gas we lost was already out. By the way, we saw a repeat of this just a few days ago when production dropped by 20 to 25% on January 2nd, when the temperatures were not nearly as severe as last February. Of course, we were only under freezing in even the coldest parts of the state for 10 to 12 hours. And yet we saw 20 to 25% drop in production. There were no power outages. So gas supply froze. And again, I'm not harping on this for any other reason than if we're going to fix the problem, we have to understand what caused the problem. And this was reason number one. You could argue reason number one, reason number two, these two are very close. Maybe it's 1A and 1B, but power plants failed. The largest outages were from thermal plants. You can see that very clearly in this helpful graphic, which shows that the thermal plants were the largest source of outages. Am I suggesting that wind and solar did not have problems and experience outages? No, I am not suggesting that. There were many outages among wind turbines. There were many outages among solar plants. You can also see those here. But in their planning, ERCOT depends on less wind and solar. They depend on more gas during this time. Now, we can talk about why that is and what that means for planning going forward. There's some really interesting questions that raises, and these are things I think about a lot. But to be real clear, the biggest source of the outages were thermal plants, where we lost somewhere around 40% of the thermal fleet. What do we mean by thermal? Coal, gas, and nuclear. So the power outages from the power plants were the major reason. And again, I'm not asking you to take my word. Look at the report. Again, when this gets sent out, the link is in there. It's a 311-page report, but there is an executive summary. There's lots of graphics. You don't have to take my word for it. The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, a nonprofit, nonpartisan, standard-setting investigatory body, this was their determination. And if we can't accept the claims of the authorities when tragedies strike, we've got real problems as a society. And by the way, we have real problems as a society, and we can talk about those problems too in the fullness of time. But this is ground truth. This is what happened. So just quickly, I'm not going to belabor this. You've probably seen this before, but this is a minute by minute what was going on at ERCOT at that time. And the reason I'm showing this chart isn't to kind of go through sort of minute by minute what ERCOT did. What I want to really focus on right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor moving, but is this red part of the graphic right here. So, and you guys probably know this. You guys are part of a group that works on, power and grid related issues. But just very quickly, what you see represented here, this 60, this is like the sort of like magic zone where the grid must live. This is frequency, 60 megahertz. You have to keep the grid in constant balance at all time. I think the best analogy I've heard to talk about this is a bathtub. The grid kind of works like it's got to be kept right at this level, and it's right up at full. And if you go too high, it overfills. And if you're not careful, it'll all leak out. It has to be kept right at that perfect balance. And so small, perturbations right here around 60 are a terrible shock, but it is very rare that we drop below, 59.9, 59.8, anywhere in there. This kind of drop down below 59.4 is fantastically rare. It hardly ever happens. And when it does, it can lead to a complete grid collapse. We were within 4 minutes and 37 seconds of a collapse, because had the frequency stayed below this black line of 59.4 for more than 9 minutes, you would have had under frequency relays at power plants trip. They do that to protect their own equipment. Some of you may have experienced, I experienced this in my own house. You may have had different sort of appliances acting weirdly, smoke alarms going off. These kinds of frequency changes can cause all sorts of weird things to happen on the grid, including on the demand side. But at power plants, they have these trips. The plant will just go offline when certain thresholds are met. And 9 minutes of 59.4 degrees will shut off, maybe not all, but most power plants. We were within 4 minutes and 37 seconds of that. The massive load shed that happened here, these huge blocks of 3,000 and then another 3,500. This was to arrest that frequency decay and to bring it back up to 60. You can see they actually overshot it a little bit and went up to 60.1. which I think is understandable because they were freaking out. I can only imagine what it was like in that control room at that point when they were within minutes of losing the entire grid. If you lose the entire grid, if the entire grid goes down, I put one of my own quotes here. Sorry for that. It's a little bit. I'll highlight somebody else's quote because it does seem kind of self-aggrandizing to quote myself. But I do think this quote was a pretty good one. But I like Pat Woods. I'll use his, former chair of the Public Utility Commission, former chair of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. If we had gone into a situation where the entire grid had gone down, we then have 13 power plants that are called black start power plants. These power plants have to bring the grid back up one plant at a time. Again, you have to be in perfect balance at 60 hertz. So what they do is they bring up one plant, they bring up the load around it and they serve that load. Then they bring up another plant and the load around it and they serve that load, then a third one, then they try to tie them together. And it's sort of a high wire act, and that can fail. Like you try to tie them together and it gets out of balance. You drop well below 60 or above 60 or whatever it is, and then it goes down again and you have to start over again. This is a very difficult process. We have 13 plants contracted for that. More than half of those plants did not work. Now think about what this means without an electric grid up for potentially weeks. Some have suggested it would have taken a month or longer to get the grid back up. Communications towers are not powered, so your cell phones will not work if you were able to even charge your cell phone to begin with, of course. Gas stations don't work. You can't operate a gas pump. So if you think you were going to drive out of state to go stay with family in another state, you probably couldn't have left the state. I mean, this is why I said in the Austin Statesman that if this doesn't work, we get to start and get into some almost apocalyptic type stuff. It starts to look like that kind of situation. Black start, half of those plants didn't work. The PUC has spent no time on this year. That's not fair. Maybe behind the scenes they have. At their open meetings, they have talked precious little about Black Start. There's a nodal protocol revision request underway at ERCOT to fix some of the problems related with Black Start. I think this needs to be a higher level discussion. This is not acceptable. Black Start must work. Hopefully we never get close to having the grid close to collapse again, but you have to have Black Start there. It must work. By the way, this podcast, The Disconnect, fantastic podcast series done by Mose Bushell and the team at KUT, Texas Public Radio. I would suggest listening to the whole thing. The Black Start episode was about 11 minutes. He does a much better job than I just did describing it. Okay, I don't want to linger too long on that. Reason number 3, and there are a lot of other reasons. I'm just sticking to 3. This is the third one, is massive demand. So these graphs are put together by Josh Rhodes. He is a scholar at UT and just a tremendous communicator. If you haven't had him to speak, I would highly recommend you invite him. He's great. He put this together, and this is super helpful. Total resources on the grid, 82 gigawatts. We expect 8 or 9, about 8.5 gigawatts of thermal outages. By the way, last week during the freeze, we had about 12. We had about 10 to 12 at different points. So at different points, anywhere from 20 to 40% more outages than we're supposed to have, which doesn't exactly inspire confidence that everything's been fixed. But we expect about 8. We expect a peak demand in the winter of about 58 gigawatts, and thus we would have plenty of reserves, 16 gigawatts of reserves. That's the green bar. Here's what February actually looked like. The resources that we thought we had, we didn't have. There were a lot more maintenance outages. So renewables were part of the problem. They were not the largest problems. If you list out what the largest problems in February were, renewables appear pretty far down on the list. That doesn't mean they're not on the list. There were some problems with renewables in February, and it's important to acknowledge that. So about 3,000 less of wind than what was expected. 10,000 megawatts of thermal maintenance outages, more than 100% more of what was expected. And then forced outages, and this basically means they weren't out just for maintenance. They weren't just tuning stuff up or something. They couldn't run because they couldn't get fuel or a part broke or whatever. Normally you would see about 4.5. There were more than 20. Okay, so that's established. We already talked about power plants breaking. What I really want to draw your attention to here is the difference in peak demand. A normal winter peak should be about 58. ERCOT thought that in an extreme winter scenario, we should have about 67 gigawatts of peak demand. We had 77 gigawatts of peak demand. That is an insane number. The highest we have ever used in the summertime is less than 75. So we are essentially now a winter peaking system because the highest we've ever used occurred during the winter and not during the summer. That's wild. Think of some of the hottest summers we've had, 2011, 2019, some of those crazy summers. We used quite a bit more. By the way, there's a paper out of Texas A&M, some excellent researchers that have run some models, and they believe that our demand actually was about 82 gigawatts. We don't know. The 77 is a modeled number because we couldn't serve that load, so we don't actually know how much demand there was, but it might have actually been far in excess of that. Why is that? Why do we have so much demand? I don't think this will be a shock to anybody. It's heat. But I do want to talk for a minute about why heating load is so high in Texas, because this has not received nearly enough attention. And I would posit to you that we will never have a resilient, reliable grid in the wintertime unless we address this problem. And I'll tell you why. So this chart, and ERCOT has not updated this chart. It's beyond me why they haven't. This was produced in 2019 after the winter of 2018, when we had a pretty cold spell in 2018. There were outages in other parts of the country. As NERC pointed out in the report, we've had 4 different outage events nationally in winter times in the last 10 years, suggesting that our winter extremes are getting worse. Didn't have outages in Texas in 2018, though things were pretty tight, and things were pretty tight because of this. Residential load on sort of a normal kind of, spring or fall day with normal usage patterns, we're not using that much load on the residential side. This is kind of obvious and intuitive. On a winter day, that jumps up significantly. The estimates are that during 2018, we're using 29 gigawatts of just load on the residential side from heat. This was probably 35 gigawatts in 2021. To put that in context, that is more than the entire state of California uses on most days. So let's talk about this for just one more minute. Why is this such a problem? Our heating in Texas, and I've been looking into this quite a bit lately, and I'm going to publish something on this in the next couple of weeks in advance of the anniversary of the winter storm. Most of our homes in Texas are heated by electricity. Texas is 61% electric heat. Just about every single one of those electric heated homes, at least as many of this 5 million of them, probably more like 5.5 to 6 million of them, have electric resistance heat that kicks in when we drop below freezing. Electric resistance heat, I'm oversimplifying it, but it is basically a toaster oven with a fan blowing over it. It is extremely inefficient. And for every degree colder you start to get, it's a non-linear increase in demand. It's an exponential increase. And as you drop more and more, you get these much bigger. So in the FERC report, they have a graph. I didn't put it in here today. I'm still trying to understand it better and dig into this and talk to people smarter than me to get a better sense of this. But the graph suggests that at 14 degrees Fahrenheit, a typical home, not even a home out of the ordinary in Texas, is using twice as much and up to 4 times as much, depending on the insulation in the walls and such, demand power as the same home is using for air conditioning in 100 degrees. Twice as much in 14 degrees, up to 4 times as much in 14 degrees as in 100 degrees. That is stunning. And if we don't solve that problem, we will always need a whole lot of supply to meet the demand. And by the way, well, I'll save that. We'll get into that later. Okay, so those are what I think are the biggest 3. Let me just, Michael or Rosa, were there any clarifying questions that I should take at this point?
I did not see any, Doug.
Great. Okay. So let's talk about what's been done so far. Then we'll get into what's left to be done, and then we'll go to Q&A. All right. So what has been done so far? Look, I am critical of folks in power and authority when I think it is important to be critical. I also think we always have to be careful that we are not giving into something that is a very real thing called negativity bias. There have been some good things done this year. I actually think that the winterization rule that the Public Utility Commission passed deserves praise from the commissioners through to the staff. I think they did a good job with this rule. What the rule does, it's over 100-page rule, and it basically, but what it does, to boil it down to its essence, are these 2 bullet points here. It adopts all the recommendations from FERC and NERC. There was also a report commissioned by I believe it was commissioned by the state or by the commission at that time, by a group called Quanta, that had some additional recommendations. These recommendations largely were not adopted as rule. That does not mean that all companies didn't follow them. Some companies, utilities, generators did follow those recommendations, but it was not a requirement, and many clearly did not. So this requires those be followed. There were also the CEOs of every company that had something break had to file an attestation that they had fixed what broke in February. So basically what happened, in my view, was the Public Utility Commission staff got into this rulemaking and was like, this is huge. We're going to split this into 2 phases. We're going to do a phase 1. Let's implement everything we know should have been implemented before anyway. Let's get that done. Let's make sure everything was fixed. Let's get that into rule quickly. That is statutory requirement to get that rule done by December 1. But they acknowledged that there is more to be done, and that this weatherization rule was not enough. So good rule, not enough. Phase 2 weatherization is still coming. There was a provision in Senate Bill 3, which was the largest storm response bill passed during the legislative session, that requires that the Public Utility Commission consult with the Texas State climatologist in passing their weatherization rule. So they consulted with him. They had him in. He spoke to them. It's a very interesting presentation. I would encourage folks to listen to it. But they are going to, in the phase 2 weatherization, take into account, I hope, climate change. To my knowledge, this will be the first time when any state agency, this is a stunning thing to say, in 2022, this will be the first time any Texas state agency has explicitly considered climate change in a rulemaking. Let that sink in for a minute. It won't be the last. Obviously, the climate is changing and we're going to have to deal with this, but this is a big deal. Credit to Donna Howard, who I showed her tweet earlier. She got the amendment on SB3 to consult with the climatologist, but credit where it's also due. Chairman Patty, who was carrying the bill in the House, left it on there, and everybody in the legislature, I don't think anybody actually tried to get that out of there. I think there's a growing awareness that, hey, maybe this climate change thing is real and is happening. So there is a phase 2 weatherization coming, and that will be vitally important and important for everybody to keep eyes on. You may have seen some headlines that on December 16th, the Public Utility Commission passed a blueprint. To me, this blueprint is very confusing. It's 4 pages of about a dozen different things, some of which really kind of conflict with each other, but they adopted it, whatever that means. It's not a rule. I struggle with this because I don't know really what this is or what exactly they did. A lot of the headlines said they increased reliability by adopting this. I don't see it. If they're calling it a blueprint, I think of a blueprint as an architectural drawing meant to build a building based on. If you tried to build a building based on this blueprint, you'd have a messed up house. I think that, and then what they did was they adopted this and then they kind of kicked it over to ERCOT. And they said, ERCOT, you guys give us a bunch of stuff on how we're going to do this. So the first piece from ERCOT is coming on Monday. It's about phase 1. And we'll see what ERCOT has to say about implementing the 8 or 9 things that were in phase 1. I highlighted one of the things in phase 1 because I know this is a renewable energy group. There are a lot of efforts to try to put significant extra charges onto renewable energy. Again, to me, this comes back to why. Why would you do that? If somebody believes that putting extra costs onto renewables would increase reliability, I would love to see a study from an independent expert of any kind that shows that. I would love to see some analysis that shows that. I don't believe that analysis exists because it's not true. Adding cost to renewables will do a lot of things. It will raise costs. It will advantage other forms of generation, but those other forms of generation didn't work in February, had problems in April and in June. And I don't believe doubling down on old fossil plants is a winning strategy to increase reliability. So this fundamental question of why is really important. But I just flagged that for you because that is, I'm not getting super into this is probably a funny thing to say, 35, 40 minutes into a presentation, but I'm not getting super into the weeds on these kinds of things. But I want to flag that because this ERCOT contingency reserve service and other ancillary services, there are a lot of folks in the market that would really love to stick it to renewables. They've been trying to do this for years, and they're using the February storm as a pretense to get it done. And I think it's really important to come back to why. And if the why is to protect somebody's business model, if the why is to advantage somebody's old asset that's out of the money, okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's be upfront about why you're doing it. But I think claiming that adding cost to renewables would increase reliability in the absence of any real credible evidence to support that claim is not helpful to actually protecting the lives and properties of Texans. Okay, phase two is I was going to say it's the bigger deal. Phase one is a big deal. There's a lot of substantive changes in phase one. One of which a change to the operating reserve demand curve was adopted without a rulemaking, without a nodal protocol revision request. It is in place right now. So the prices we all are paying for energy are affected by a change that had no formal proposed rule published in the Texas Register, no comment period on the proposed rule, no stakeholder input at ERCOT for a nodal protocol revision request, but it's in place. So they're moving fast, which I understand, but I think we have those kinds of procedures in place for a reason. And I think this is a pretty big red flag. But so the phase one stuff is big. The phase two stuff is potentially bigger if it gets done. We will get a report from ERCOT on those February 15th. So that I keep moving and finish on time, I'm not going to dive deeper into these, but I would say what the load serving entity obligation, which you see on your screen right now, this is essentially a form of a capacity market that requires bilateral trades, which means there's no central market where price formation happens. Instead, it requires the market participants to go and procure their energy in a bilateral sort of opaque, non-transparent kind of a way. This is similar to the system that California has. It is not the same. It's different in significant ways, but it is similar to that. It is basically a California-style capacity market. The Public Utility Commission's consultant said that the load serving entity obligation would raise costs by 7%. That comes out to roughly $1.5 billion every year. If the argument is this will make our grid more reliable, I would just like to point out that the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy said that we could reduce our heating load by 8 gigawatts for $800 million. $800 million spent once. They're talking about $1.4 billion every single year. And it's dubious whether or not that would actually make our system more reliable. So if people want to talk more about that, we'll talk about it in the Q&A, but I'm going to keep moving. What else was done? The costs of the storm were securitized. This is basically a very large, fancy mortgage. You take all the costs, you spread it out over 15 to 30 years. Some could be as low as 10 years. $6 billion in costs, $3.4 billion in gas costs. If you are a gas customer, you will see $2 to $5 extra that'll stay on your bill for 10 years or more. On the electric side, we're not yet sure because there's still sort of things working through settlement and various court cases, but there's about, I believe the number is $3 billion. It's like 2.9 billion, I think would be more accurate, that is going to be securitized and added to bills, whether or not that'll be a line item on the bill or it just kind of slides right into your overall cost and you don't see it, we don't know yet, but $6 billion was securitized. That does not include the electric co-ops, by the way. Many of you in North Texas may be served by a co-op that rolls up to Brazos Electric Cooperative. They're in bankruptcy. There was a securitization bill passed for the co-ops too. They famously lost $2 billion. So the $6 billion is not everything, but that's what we've got so far. What else has been done? And by the way, I should say, I don't think securitization in and of itself is a bad thing. My criticism of securitization is I basically think this is like our backdoor climate policy, because we securitize after hurricanes too. We don't plan for climate extremes. We just wait till they happen. We suffer the damage, and then we securitize the costs, rinse and repeat. It's not a good climate strategy, but not having a climate strategy doesn't mean you're not actually living and experiencing a climate strategy. And this is how we do it in Texas right now. We just ignore it, pretend it doesn't exist, wait for the costs, and securitize them, spread them out over decades. There's only so long you could do that before people can't afford their electric bills, and there's evidence that that's already happening. Okay, again, lots of negativity here. I'm trying to look for the good too. The PUC moved with extraordinary speed to approve a new transmission line that should have been approved many years ago, but these 4 commissioners are brand new. They got this built. It's not built. They got it approved. It's going to be built. It's going to take 5 years to build as part of the problem with transmission. It's like planting the tree. It takes a little while, but we're going to have a power line in the Rio Grande Valley, which has not been adequately served. This is really important. They have sped up the process for the Southern Cross interconnect. This will allow us to export Texas renewables to the Eastern Interconnect 90% of the year, maybe 95% of the year. And when we're in a grid emergency, we can turn the flow backwards, bring power in from the Eastern Interconnect. This is a classic win-win-win. Rural communities get more renewable development. This is dollars flowing into Texas for our energy export and increasing reliability. We should be doing more of this. What else has happened? The Railroad Commission proposed a rule with $150 opt-out for gas. I want to be clear, this Railroad Commission rule did pass. This was not a rule for winterization of gas wellheads or associated infrastructure. This was a rule to require gas infrastructure to register as critical so they don't get their power shut off. Again, the Railroad Commission in Texoga and others claimed that all of the gas outages were because of the power outages. If that were true, this rule might be enough. Unfortunately, it's not true. So there is a requirement for winterization of gas that's coming in 2022. For now, what we have is a rule that requires gas to register as critical infrastructure. It was proposed to give gas operators an opt-out, but because of public outcry, media attention, many of you may have written letters. The Railroad Commission received 1,000 letters from the public. This made a difference. They adopted a rule that was much stronger than at the beginning. This removed rather the opt-out for 80% of supply. The way they did that, and I think the rule actually ended up pretty decent, was they basically said the 19,000 wellheads and other infrastructure that they did an 80-20 rule. Like what provides 80% of the gas, you can't opt out. I hope they do the same thing with winterization. The argument all along, which I think has some legitimacy from the industry, was, hey, the oil and gas system in Texas is huge. It's very diffuse. There's a lot of very small producing marginal wells out there. If you make everybody winterize, that could be a problem, and could be really expensive, and you wouldn't get a lot of benefit out of that. This rule addressed that by looking at the 80% of supply. So we still don't have a rule on winterization. That's coming. This, by the way, it doesn't. I've got a link in the notes part, which you'll see when you get the presentation. But this is a press release from Commission Shift, which is doing great work, watching the proceedings of the commission, the Railroad Commission. Even I, who spend a lot of time doing this stuff, I don't have time to watch every meeting and follow things in detail. So organizations like this are invaluable to providing the public information on what's going on. I'd encourage you to sign up for their email list or follow their Twitter or whatever. This was their statement on what happened, and I think they got it right. The public outcry made a really big difference. So keeping with gas, what still needs to be done? We need to winterize gas supply. This has not been done. We have to first, because of the convoluted way this got done in the law in Senate Bill 3, because oil and gas industry worked that bill really hard. When the bill came out of the Senate, it was winterized gas supply by December 1, 2022. 2021, forgive me. December, it would have been already done. When it went over to the House, there was a provision put in there that created this electricity supply chain mapping committee. I think there's a couple other words in there. That committee is created. They've been meeting. Before the rule can be adopted by the Railroad Commission, they must produce their final report. Statute doesn't require that till September. They have said publicly they're going to have their report out in April. That starts a 6-month timeline for them to complete the rule. If the report is done in April, the winterization should be in place. That rule should be adopted by October, in advance of next winter, also in advance of the elections. Not saying there's any connection, but could just be a coincidence. I don't know. But regardless of the politics of it, that rule is going to be critically important. If you come back to why, and it's protecting life and it's protecting property, we must have a robust rule for winterizing gas supply What happened on January 2nd and 3rd when we lost 25% of supply in what was really, historically speaking, a mild freeze, we got to get this right. We're not there yet. The voluntary efforts, despite the claims of the industry, are not enough. This is a clear case where regulation is needed. And I don't think, by the way, that regulation is anti the industry at all. This should be something that they should readily accept. I hope everybody understands that there is a role for regulation. To me, the best analogy to this is restaurant inspections, right? If you don't think that gas wells should be required to winterize and be inspected, then you are the most extreme libertarian. You're just like, we don't need to inspect restaurants. Just take your chances when you come in, right? There is clearly a role for some basic level of regulation in our society. And when we've had an event where 750 people have died and $100 billion in damage has been done, and the nonpartisan independent investigative authority that investigated it for the better part of an entire year, day in, day out, tells us the two top causes, one of those two top causes was gas supply, you got to be willing to accept some regulation there. It would just be crazy not to. I think we need to talk about the gas markets as well. As everybody knows, prices skyrocketed during this event. There is no regulation of the gas market intrastate. Zero, none. If somebody knows of somebody that is regulating intrastate gas trading, please tell me. I've been asking this question now for months. Nobody's given me an answer. FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, has clear authority over interstate trading granted to it by the Federal Power Act of the 1930s. But the Natural Gas Act in the 1930s and 70s deregulated the price of natural gas, gave some authority to FERC to investigate market manipulation if it's crossing state lines. Within the state of Texas, nobody is regulating gas trading. Think of all the gas that is produced in the Permian and sent to our population center, or there you go further, wherever, and sent to our population centers in DFW, Houston, San Antonio, never crosses the state line. Now think about that. Nobody is regulating it. The Attorney General said publicly after the storm that he would investigate price gouging of gas. I haven't yet seen the results of that investigation, and I'm not holding my breath. We're going to see the results of that investigation. Okay, so these are the to-dos. What should we do? We should increase baseload efficiency. I've already talked about this. I won't belabor it too much, but I would direct your attention to this chart here on the left that shows how much savings from energy efficiency various states get. Here's the average state. What is that? 1.2% is the average, 1.3, somewhere in there. Texas gets 0.2%. We are 83% lower than the average state in energy efficiency. Remember what I said before about resistance heating? We are heating our homes with toaster ovens with fans blowing over them. By the way, with really poor insulation, because 2/3 of our homes and buildings were built before there was a building code in place. And even among the 1/3 that were built after building codes were in place, those codes are not always enforced or inspected adequately. And if you live in an unincorporated area of the county, you still have no building code of any kind, by the way, not just energy code, no code. Carbon, by the way, our building codes do not require carbon monoxide testing, right? Carbon monoxide monitoring, right? Remember that earlier slide of how many people died because of carbon monoxide poisoning. So building codes, and I call this baseload energy efficiency because I really want to drive this home. I'm hoping over the course of 2022, people will begin to understand this, that energy efficiency, this saves, a lot of people will talk about energy efficiency as if it's only demand response, as if you can't call on it, it's not useful. But reducing energy use through things like HVAC replacement and insulation and other measures, but those two primarily, those reduce energy year round, but more at extreme events, right? So the colder and hotter it gets, the more payoff you get from that more efficient heater, HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning system, or insulation. The one on the right just shows how much various states have achieved of their economic potential. This is not technical. This is how much energy efficiency, if you did it, you would be paid back for it. In other words, you're leaving money on the table if you don't do it. We are less than 20%. Note a lot of states have come close to achieving most of their economic potential. Texas is nowhere close. So even if you, again, what's your why? If your why is resiliency, you should be doing energy efficiency. If your why is lowering costs, we should be doing energy efficiency. If your why is creating a more robust economy with less waste in it, we should be doing energy efficiency. I think energy efficiency answers just about every why, and we'll test that in a minute when we get to some of the whys you put in the chat. We could also set up a system where we're paying for performance. We have smart meters throughout the state. We can measure the reductions. We don't need to have complicated formulas. We can actually measure the reduction from energy efficiency. California has just taken a major step to do this. I think Texas could do this better than California. I literally think we could outdo them. I think I've looked at their rule. I've talked to a lot of people involved in it. I think it's okay. I think it's a pretty good rule. I think Texas could do this better. And I think it could be the next wave of innovation and competition in Texas. We could set up competition for who can drive the most energy savings and reward those contractors and manufacturers that drive the most. We'll give you higher incentives based on your performance. Okay, so there's baseload energy efficiency. There's also dispatchable energy efficiency, often called demand response. But it doesn't have to just be a smart thermostat. It could be a battery in your garage. It could be a control on your hot water heater, your pool pump, your refrigerator, all sorts of different things. What this seemingly complicated graphic actually shows is that if you have demand reductions in the market, so you need less supply, your prices go lower. This, by the way, is why generators oppose demand response at every turn. This is why it will take leadership from the Public Utility Commission. And again, to not give into negativity bias and to give credit where credit is due. In the phase 1 blueprint that was adopted on December 16th, I'm using their language. I don't think it was really a blueprint, but in the blueprint, they put in there something about virtual power plants and having ERCOT identify barriers to this kind of dispatchable demand in the market. This would make our market more economically efficient. That means it would lower prices for consumers. It would also increase reliability by having more resources, more distributed, right? With the gas supply and with the gas power plants and coal power plants for that matter, these are large points of failure. If you distribute those resources throughout the grid, you put the power more locally, and you have a broader, that if you have a point of failure, one of your dispatchable demand side resources doesn't show up, you have so many more that you're able to call on. A lot of people, you'll hear people say, oh, this is going to take too much customer involvement. People aren't going to do this kind of dispatchable demand. People don't think about energy except when they open their energy bill, and maybe not even then. These are automated changes. This is literally, you set the parameters. How cold will you allow your house to go? You don't want it to go below 68, even in the most extreme emergency? Fine. You don't want it to go below 72 in the most extreme emergency? Fine. But if you're willing to let it go lower than that, we will pay you. And you don't have to do anything. It will happen automatically. And even if you're not willing to have your thermostat moved, what about your electric hot water heater? Do you need that water heated up at the exact moment when the grid is getting close to an outage? Or is what you really care about, as Anne-Marie Lovins often says, all I really care about are cold beers and hot showers. If all you want is for the water to be hot when you turn it on, you don't necessarily care when your water is heated. You just want the water heated. So what if I pay you to heat that water at a time when power is cheaper, and pay you to leave it off when it's more expensive? Think about electric vehicle charging, by the way. We are now over 100,000 electric vehicles in the state of Texas. Important milestone. We're going to be at 1 million within a couple of years, maybe a couple of 3 years. Who knows? It could go fast, it could go slow. Who knows? Think about charging all those electric vehicles. If we do it when prices are high, it's going to be very expensive. If we do it when they're cheap, we can integrate all of those cleanly, affordably, reliably, et cetera. So the point here is this is automated. This does not require active involvement of consumers other than to receive money. There's a lot of investment going into this kind of thing. I just highlight this because this is one of the largest real estate and investment firms that says we're looking at the cash flow associated with these virtual power plants, this dispatchable demand. It's an amenity that people want. You got a battery in your house. You know you can keep things running in an outage. And on the other days of the year when there's no threat of outage, you're making money. I think we're going to see this happen more and more. Local power for resilience is a big to-do. We need to think of microgrids located really close to critical infrastructure. And we need to think more broadly about critical infrastructure is. Remember when I talked about if the grid had gone down and the black start plants didn't work, every communication tower needs to have backup power at it. Every nursing home needs to have backup power at it. Every dialysis center, we need every community to have a school or a municipal building or multiple schools and municipal buildings where people know that they can go and there will be running water and there will be heat in the wintertime, cooling in the summertime, where they can stay safe with their families. The military's moving in this direction. HEB, most of their stores did not lose power during the storm because they've got these small natural gas microgrids at them, but you can increasingly do microgrids with solar and storage. Many of them are doing hybrid solar storage and natural gas. This is really important. All of these things, by the way, I don't think there's really been much done at all by the state on these things, and that's why they're in the to-do list. Climate resilience hubs, the city of Austin's looking at this, many other cities around the state are. I just put that headline in there about water because I don't want to lose track of the fact that when I was talking earlier about all the damage, being without water for 4 to 5 days obviously was a significant problem, and that hit 12 million Texans. To do number 6, I'm wrapping up here, I'm almost done. Direct assistance for customers. Nothing has been done here. Nothing at the state level. There has been federal money flowed through state agencies to help people pay their utility bills. My understanding is that money has run out. This just came out a couple days ago. 38% of Texans are skipping basic expenses to pay their energy bill. Remember what I said earlier about securitization? Thank God I'm in a position where like $2 to $5 a month doesn't mean that much to me. And about half our state that's true for, but 37.7% of Texans aren't in that situation. $2 to $5 means something to them. We need to look at direct assistance for people to pay their energy bills. It's a matter of life and death. Climate planning, we don't do any climate planning. I told you that earlier. And the insurance companies are going to be pushing for this more and more. One of the things we're seeing in related to climate mitigation and adaptation is big companies pushing for it increasingly. This quote from Bill Magnus, while the outages were done at this point, but we're only just done, we don't have any climate specialists on staff. Guess what? You think ERCOT has any climate specialists on staff right now? Nope. Billion-dollar weather disasters. You notice there's a dark red state right in the middle there. You probably recognize that outline. This is Texas billion-dollar disasters. By the way, Climate Central, they have great graphics. If you're ever doing a presentation, go look at their graphics, use them. They want them to be used. Look at that. Look at that difference over the decades. And what do you think the 2020s are going to look like? By the way, Uri's not in this 2010s. So, all right. Climate equity, we have to address this. This can't be something we think of after the fact. This needs to be central to planning. When you look at this kind of number, this is disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities around the state, though a lot of white rural communities too. But we need to take into account equity in our planning. And we need to understand, to that point, that there's a lot of energy poverty throughout the state. It is more concentrated in historically marginalized communities. But if we address this in a systematic way, rural communities, which are certainly not monochromatic, but are predominantly white, would benefit too. So we need to really start thinking expansively about climate equity. It is interesting some of the pushback that has come when places like Harris County have started to actually do this. And many affluent neighborhoods have pushed back significantly. But we must understand the legacies of racism and that redlining and this very long history of pushing Black and brown communities into areas that were closer to industrial facilities, that had a lack of basic services like wastewater and drainage. You see the picture of this pipe right here. This was a community that flooded 3 times, right? Not just Harvey, but the 2 1 in 500 year floods on either end of it. When we do our climate planning, climate equity needs to be in there. This could almost be 7A, 7B. These 2 things need to go closely together. Better outage management. We've heard a lot about this, but you can't have some homes go down for 0 hours and some homes down for 96 hours. That can't happen ever again. You can't have your downtown skylines lit up while people don't have power. I have this on the to-dos. I think the utilities have made some progress here. I don't know how significant it is. So I'm leaving this on the to-do until I see better evidence that they've done it. This is the final one, and it is fundamental. The Public Utility Commission and the Railroad Commission and the Texas legislature and the governor and everybody need to think about how to pull the public into this process. Do the public's whys match up with the policymakers' whys? What do people want out of their system? Why do they want certain changes? The last time we did a major market redesign in ERCOT was in the late 90s. And you can read about these things at these 2 places in that book, Great Texas Wind Rush, which is a great read. If you haven't read it already, highly recommend it, by Asher Price and Kate Galbraith. They did, at that time, the Public Utility Commission held 8 different day-long, or in some cases days-long, 1 to 2 day long events, where they paid the public to come and think about energy and to solicit their feedback on what they wanted out of their energy system. Has this happened in Texas this time? No, it needs to happen. We need to be listening to the public about what they want. Just like I said earlier, don't take my word for it. Read the NERC report. Don't take my word for it on what should be done. We should be asking the public. We should be listening to them. This is a headline from RTO Insider. PUC forges ahead with ERCOT market redesign. Stakeholder and public input limited in market blueprint. I know I'm out of time. I'm going to end on this. You had. I'm sorry. What were you, Michael? You were motioning?
Oh no, I didn't see your slide. It didn't. It just now popped up on the.
Thank you. There's a little bit of lag there.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is still number 10. This is just a second image here. I just wanted to point this out. The public input. I said the PUC has adopted this blueprint. In some cases, adopted rules, and other just given direction to ERCOT. It's kind of confusing, but they've at least adopted what they call a blueprint. What is the public input to that blueprint been? They have a stakeholder process. They take public comments. You can submit public comments. There's no indication that those comments are actually read. I think in previous rounds they were. When they adopted the blueprint, they put out the blueprint on December 6th. They gave 96 hours for 5 pages of public testimony. When they adopted this on December 16th, they did not reference one single comment that was put into the record. 20 plus people showed up. They are limited to only 3 minutes of input. There is no back and forth with the commission. That's not fair. A couple of times commissioners said something in response, but very little back and forth, very little active listening. Like, hey, what did you mean by that? I want to understand you better. It's just people talking sort of at them, and then the commission moves on and adopts their blueprint. This is not good enough. We need a better public process. This is why I titled this talk "Of, By, and For the People." In conclusion, some progress has been made, a lot left to be done. The changes need to be of, by, and for the people. Your involvement is key, that you're part of this organization, that you are listening to my very long presentation today. If you're wondering why I talk so long, Rosa and Michael and the rest, y'all told me to talk for 60 to 70 minutes. I told you before I didn't think I would talk that long. I am long-winded. I talk that long
But the policymakers need to roll out the welcome mat for you and the rest of the public. It shouldn't be you have to go out of your way to drive to Austin, which, by the way, is what you have to do now. There is no call-in option anymore. You in North Texas have to drive to Austin for your 3 minutes to then be dismissed. This is not public input. This needs to be improved. This is my contact info, and I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to your comments. I want to hear some of your whys in some of the comments and questions, and I'll turn it over to Michael and Rosa to facilitate Q&A.
Doug, I
As
can't thank
always.
you.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rosa.
No, I can't thank you enough. You talked for as long as you did, but I will tell you, you did not lose, except one person who had told us earlier they had to leave by 11 o'clock. You have the entire group that joined us at the beginning still here with you. So your presentation was more than informative. And we do have some questions and substantive questions. So let's start. Michael, do you want to go first, or should we go through the whys first that people put into the chat?
Let's just start at the first question that we got or that I recognized. And then if you feel you asked a question that we didn't address, I've got 11 of them through the entire text and chat. We'll do that. And then if you feel like you still have a question that wasn't answered within the chat, please bring it up. We'll try to get it answered. I do want to let you know, Doug, that our crew, all of our attendees here, we have a tendency to go over our 12 o'clock usually.
I'll hang with you for the duration. As you could tell, I love talking about this stuff. I'm here. Let's do it.
Okay, so let's get this going. All
Yep.
right, so I'm going to start off with a question that was from Tracy Wallace, and it deals with equity. Let me get back up to it here. Sorry. And I have 3 new questions, which I don't have a chance to take a look at yet.
Michael, while you're
For
getting
some
to that
reason,
one,
I can't find
Is it
that
the one? Is it the one that says, why would the state pay to bail out power companies?
Yes. Tracy
By
Wallace
paying-
at 1038. So why would the state pay to bail out power companies by paying their natural gas bills? That was in the Dallas Morning News on the 2nd of January 22, and not help pay homeowners for their damage.
Yeah.
Especially those without insurance. So this is a question of equity, and you've addressed it. You addressed it as one of your issues and to-do issues that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah. So the question is, why would the state do this? And I would encourage you to ask your member of the legislature why that is the case. I can't answer for the state on that. I think it is that's indefensible. So I'm not going to try to provide an answer for them. I will say on the securitization side, the way the system works, or arguably doesn't work, but the way it operates, the natural gas distribution utilities, which for North Texas would be Atmos, right, Centerpoint in Houston, et cetera, Texas Gas Service down here where I live, they generally flow through their fuel charges. So they will purchase gas to serve their load. They were purchasing more gas than they expected they were going to purchase. They were purchasing it at very high prices. Again, we have no market monitor. So if you and I and the rest of the state were gouged on this, we don't know. There's no investigation into that, but they have to pay it. And that is Atmos, for instance, has to pay that bill. And they, by law, are allowed to take any of their costs and give them to you. So the reason they securitized was to spread that cost out over decades. So it looks like $2 to $5 a month and not $40 to $50 a month for 1 year or 2 years, or $20 for 2 years, or however you wanted to splice that up, right? So they're trying to spread the costs out. So I get why they're doing it. Again, my problem with that is exactly as Tracy said, why not some direct assistance for people who had problems along with that? Also, why aren't the gas companies doing energy efficiency programs? There's basically it's a couple $1 million or something that Texas Gas does. And maybe y'all know, I don't think Atmos has programs. If they do, they're a couple $1 million. They could be doing insulation in people's walls. They could, I mean, that could happen on the gas side too. So there's a lot that could happen there, that needs to happen there. But, your fundamental question, I am not going to try to defend the indefensible. I think that providing this kind of financial assurance to companies and not to people is an indefensible policy decision.
Hey, Doug, I don't know if this question came in before Tracy's or not, but Glenn Serhan, who has been a longtime member, he lives in Garland, and he was wondering why there's been so little discussion about the demand with code changes that would reduce the demand.
No, and I did address that a little bit later on. Look, energy codes, and I worked a lot on energy codes when I was director of the Energy Efficiency Organization. I know more than the average bearer about them. They are very impactful policies. The state is still stuck on the 2015, which is a good code, but it's not as good as the 2021. We ought to be considering upgrading. I talked earlier about insurance companies suing ERCOT. That's a tangent. I don't understand why they're not suing other folks besides ERCOT, but regardless, the insurance companies are starting to require local jurisdictions to have higher building codes to insure homes in those areas. Well, this is going to be a mega trend throughout the 2020s. It's going to be very hard to get insurance for your home if it's not up to code, because the insurance payouts on these increasingly strong storms, hurricanes, floods, wildfires, et cetera, like you are going to need to have better codes adopted locally. The state can adopt a state building code and did that some years ago, but again, we're behind on that. It's a no-brainer from a logical point of view. There is there's a very small increased upfront cost. It may be a few $100, right? And I just said earlier, there's a lot of people living on the margins. So I don't want to downplay a small upfront cost, but it is spread out over 30 years, right? And the energy savings are larger than the upfront cost. So even in year one, with a better building code, you're saving more than you're spending, right? So I really think this is a no-brainer, but the home builders work very hard to keep higher building codes from being adopted, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Glenn, did that answer your question?
Well, yeah, there's just so many questions, but I really appreciate your presentation, Doug. And yeah, I mean, it's the same old story. Who really makes those decisions? Is it left to builders, or is it our society cost? Those are much more complex issues, but thank you, Doug, for what you're saying. I appreciate what you're trying to do.
Thank you, Glenn. And I would just say, by the way, your local government does have the ability, your cities, not your counties, your cities have the authority to adopt higher building codes.
Thank you. I pushed on that, by the way, a little bit.
Want me to take the next one, Rosa?
Yes,
We're
please.
going to alternate on the questions back and forth there for you, Doug. The next one is by Susan Alvarez. That was at 10:42. And let me get back up there because we just had a new question come in.
Yeah, what about price majeure that is currently being investigated? That is being investigated in interstate trading.
Okay.
That is my understanding. And if somebody has better understanding than me, like I said, there's a lot more I don't know than what I do know. And so if I'm wrong, tell me. But my understanding, and I have asked this question directly of folks at FERC, is that they cannot investigate within the state of Texas for interstate trading. So, but to your question, Susan, there will be a lot coming out on price majeure in interstate trading. We will see results of a FERC investigation. I don't know what those results will show. For all I know, they could show that there wasn't price gouging or market manipulation. I honestly don't know, but I'm just struck that there's not an investigation going on within the state borders. A lot of this will also come out through the lawsuits, right? There's a lot of lawsuits right now. CPS has one. Brazos Electric Co-op has one. There, I mean, or multiple. The insurance companies have one. I mean, there's lawsuits all over the place, and some of that may come out through those processes too. I suspect it will.
Hey, Doug, are the individual solar installations that we've all engaged in, are those included in the EIA data for Texas in the 2% of source of energy? Do you know?
So I don't know exactly which one you're talking about, but in general, it is very hard to count distributed solar. ERCOT has made some improvements to that. And I believe we are now up somewhere north of 500 megawatts of solar. And I think it's actually much closer to about a gigawatt of distributed solar throughout the state of Texas. There are significant challenges with counting it all up. For utility scale solar, we are currently at about 8 gigawatts. It changes so rapidly. We might be closer to 9 by now. We are expected to be at 10 well in advance of the summer, and expected to be somewhere above 20 gigawatts of solar in advance of the summer of 2023. This is a phenomenal story. And I mean, if you would have told me 10 years ago, we'd be over 20 gigawatts by 2023, I would have said, thanks for your optimism, but that's loopy. No, I mean, this is just, and I think we're going to see the same with electric vehicles, by the way. I think we're going to see very similar trends with people getting battery storage along with their solar systems in some cases a standalone, smart thermostats. All these technologies, I think, are going to follow more of, like the technology adoption curve for most, for a lot of technologies over the last couple of decades, right? It was like refrigerators took a long time, air conditioners took a long time, and then you get to like, modern electronics, and it's just straight line up. I don't think we'll see the straight line, but I think we're going to see a lot of hockey sticks with these kinds of technologies. And by the way, I my email, I think, is still on the screen. If you send me the EIA report, I'm happy to look at it and tell you and answer your specific question. I just don't know which EIA report you're referring to.
I think there is. This is Larry Howe. Just FYI, I think the EIA has been trying to report on small system solar production estimates by state for a couple of years now. So I'll find the link to that and put that in there. It's kind of a estimated projection based on some things, but at least they're attempting to do it.
Thank you, Larry.
Of course, we always have Encore that as far as in this part of the deregulated market, but they're not really forthcoming on their individual distributed, systems as far as who, what, and where, and how much. And then every city has a different set of permitting codes and how they record the permits. And a lot of times a permit may be submitted, but it may not be completed. And so you may, it's just a hodgepodge. It'd be nice if we had a state standard on how to report all this information. We'd be ahead of the curve, especially for residential solar. Commercial as well, like a small business that decides to go solar plus storage. All the interconnect information is there, but it's considered private information, so it's not as public,
Yeah, and ERCOT has been pushing pretty hard on the utilities to get better information and give it to them, because as you might expect, ERCOT is trying to, they need to know that, they need to know where the, how much is there and where it is. And so I think there is some better data gathering going on there.
Well, I think the next question should be asked by the questioner herself. 1054, Rose, you asked the question.
Well, actually, I was looking at somebody else's questions. I was trying to take them in order.
Well, Glenn asked one right before you about connecting to the national grid. Was that it?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my question was, if we were connected to the national grid, would this problem not happen in February 2021? Number one. Number two, connecting to the national grid allows us in Texas to sell our energy, which we have a lot of potential solar and wind in the state, to other states and help to reduce emissions in other states too as well, help the entire nation by doing that.
Yeah, I do believe we should have better interconnects. That NERC and FERC report did say the outages would have been less severe and not lasted as long had we been interconnected. I want to be clear because there's been a lot of confusion about this. In the initial stages of the outages, like the night of February 14th into the morning of February 15th, those interconnections would not have served us. We do have interconnections right now. It's just only 1.2 gigawatts. Some of that's to Mexico, some is to the Eastern Interconnect through, is it through SPP or MISO? I forget, but so it's 1.2 gigawatts right now. We couldn't get any power from those interconnects that night. So no matter how much interconnection you had that night, you weren't getting any because MISO and SPP were going into rolling outages, and Mexico was also affected by our gas supply shutting down. So Mexico was having its own problems. So in those moments, it wouldn't have helped. The next day, it would have helped. And the day after that, it would have helped. And the day after that, it would have helped even more, right? So, and by the way, I mean, the other thing is, do we want to be FERC jurisdictional, right? I actually think that there are advantages to Texas being independent. I do. It's just it's a personal view. Many people don't share it. That's fine. I think there's advantages to Texas being independent. I do not think it is, I know it's not inconsistent to say we should be independent of FERC. And the reason I say that is that intrastate line I was showing, the Rio Grande Valley one, if we were FERC jurisdictional, you got to go through all the FERC reviews for transmission. It slows down, and there's other things that would slow down too. But you can interconnect to other interconnects and not become FERC jurisdictional. You need a jurisdictional waiver. If I'm not mistaken, it's been a while since I've heard him say something like this, but I believe Chairman Glick has said of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, he's very open to considering those jurisdictional waivers to get interconnections to other grids. The Southern Cross already has, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, already has the jurisdictional waivers to get 2 gigawatts interconnected to the southeastern United States. So we can do both. We could, yeah, and I think we should do both. And to your last point, yes, we could export a lot of renewable energy and make a lot of money off it. I had a Pat Wood quote up earlier. Pat Wood once said, just like we got rich in the state from what's below the ground over the last century, oil and gas, we can get rich from what's above the ground, wind, solar, in the next century.
Just a quick comment. I looked at what China is doing, where they're importing electricity in Western China into Eastern China. They're building with ABB and Hitachi a 33 gigawatt high voltage DC transmission system. 33 gigawatts, that's a lot. And I don't think we're going to get there with the existing three-phase power lines. They went to high voltage DC. That's going to be the future, and we need to get on board and be a part of that future. And China's, doing it.
And we have zero, by the way, we have zero HVDC in the state of Texas. And again, I do like to take the opportunity to point out where I think progress has been made in this commission, this recently installed commission. The 4 new commissioners have made significant progress there. Commissioner Glotfelty actually spent part of his career working on transportation with Clean Line. Commissioner Cobos has really dug in deeply on this Rio Grande Valley stuff. So I think there's real potential for that there. And I think that they're off to a really good start in that particular area.
I'm just thinking about selling it to other places. 33 gigawatts is a huge amount. You can move all over the country, and it's not just in Texas, but all across the United States. Let's think that we're still part of the United States, and we all need to work together to solve these problems.
I totally agree. Here.
Michael, I guess I'll ask my question. Doug, when you were showing us the charts of where the demand came from during the winter storm, and you were showing us the almost 77,000 level of gigawatts, I think, that we needed that was made there, right there. The thought came to me because I used to be more of a follower of census numbers for different reasons, but millions of people have moved to Texas in the last 10 years. And those millions of people have need electricity and water. And so I was wondering whether anybody had collated the increased population in its anticipated demand with what was being anticipated during the winter storm.
That's a great question. ERCOT has a process for creating they what they call the long-term system assessment. They do take into account growing population in that process. We have such a interesting system. Like ERCOT doesn't sort of like they have a long-term system planning process, but they don't. And this is one of the biggest confusions after February and through to the present day is like ERCOT is very limited in what it can do. Like there was a lot of blame put on ERCOT that was really not deserved. Not to say that ERCOT was blameless and did everything right. I am not asserting that at all, but they were given a much bigger share of the blame than they actually deserved. They cannot order new generation. They can't even order new transmission. They are given a set of criteria by which they must consider transmission. So all that is to say, like, the local utilities, the transmission distribution utilities like Encore up in your neck of the woods, they're the ones that have to take into account population growth and come to the PUC and say, here's how much new distribution, infrastructure we want to build. It's the generators making market decisions based on investment formula and things like that that decide how much generation to build. So it's kind of diffuse. But your point is really well made. And look, I think people are going to continue to move to Texas. I love it here. I think all of us on this call love it here, and we'd already have left. And it's a great place to live. And I think we're going to see more people moving here. So we've got to get better at all of this and understand that if we put people into homes that aren't well insulated and have inefficient heat, this problem is going to continue. And on the flip side, if we put people into efficient homes with solar and storage and manage charging for their electric vehicle, their homes can start to serve as a resource, right? All our new homes should be viewed as grid resources, and increasingly our existing homes. So yes, they take that into account, but no, they don't have enough authority to really do anything about it, if that makes sense. Hey, before you go to the next question, I forgot my very last slide, which is I do a lot of things in my consulting business. One of the things I do is I put together this Texas Energy Summit, and you guys be like one of our main audiences for this. We are going to try to hold it in person at the Capitol. Coronavirus, if it dies down by then, we'll do it in person. We're really hoping that this Omicron wave will burn out and we'll be fine by early March, if not fine, at least manageable enough that we can gather in person to state capitol. All the things we talked about today will be on the agenda there. So I hope you'll mark your calendar. Registration's open. Okay, that's my plug. Sorry, I should have done it earlier. I'm a bad salesperson.
That's great. and we do post events like yours on our website for our members.
Thank you.
To be aware of and hopefully to attend. Hey, who knows? We may even do a caravan down there. So
that'd be great.
The next question I have is from Mark Whitty at 1054. His question deals with maintenance of plants. Why can't thermal plant maintenance outages be scheduled for periods when demand is not expected to be exceptional because of extreme weather?
That's a great question. And here I'll say something positive about the governor's leadership in this, because the governor did put together a letter. The overall letter, I think most of it wasn't very helpful, but there was one piece in there. This is back in July. He sent a letter, and one of the things that he highlighted in his letter was, why can you guys at the PUC that I've appointed please look at scheduling maintenance for power plants better? And I have not seen a lot of progress on that. It doesn't mean progress hasn't been made. I can't attend every meeting. I don't hear every conversation that goes on. Maybe they have made progress on that. But it's a great question. It needs to happen. One of the changes the Public Utility Commission made was to, whenever there are outages of power plants, we can see them 3 days later. I was tweeting about this recently. During the recent cold snap, there was 10 gigawatts of power plants out. I didn't go through and look at how much was forced versus planned. Presumably, most of that was forced outages and not planned, but I don't know that. A day or two later, after the worst of the cold snap, that went up to 12 gigawatts. So we still got problems there. And whether the issue is, it continues to be better planned maintenance, or whether the issue is making sure stuff doesn't break, I don't know. It could be both. But that seems like a very solvable problem. And I don't know if they've solved it yet. Doesn't mean they haven't, I just don't know. That was a clear directive from the governor to get it fixed.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if they made maybe they'll make a report on that in the meeting they have next Thursday, but I haven't seen anything yet.
There are a number of comments that I have skipped over because I thought they had been addressed by Doug in the both in the presentation and in the discussion we've had since then. But here's one from James. James, I don't know if you want to ask your question regarding the thoughts on the next step in Texas for T&D utilities. No? Okay.
The question was, there's a rate case back in 2017 where Encore introduced a ridiculous proposal for changing the rate structure to address distributed generation customers. And California is going through their net metering 3.0, and they're trying to address the similar thing. They have a different utility structure, but I'm curious if you have any insight as to when Encore and the other T&D utilities are going to come back with that type of a rate structure change.
So this is a big question. It's a really big question. Let's see how I can address this briefly, and then James, maybe you and I can follow up. But so net metering in Texas is different because of the competitive market structure. There is a great organization that works on this called Solar United Neighbors. I don't know if they've been a part of what you guys are doing. Are y'all familiar with that? Okay.
Yes, we are.
You might ask them for yeah, if they haven't made a presentation before, you might ask them to do this because they have been researching net metering offerings in Texas. My understanding is after February, there aren't any left, or if there are, it's like one or two and they just aren't very good. Before the winter storm, there were only like 4 or 5 net metering offerings, and those were not great.
Yeah.
The transmission distribution utilities could have, if the regulators ordered it, some kind of a time of use rate structure, but that's not the way it's done right now, right? There are 3 or 4 cents that is theirs, quote unquote, right? So you get a bill from Reliant, and if you look at your bill or your TXU or whatever, and if you look at that bill, there's a T&D charge, and that's somewhere between 3 and 4 cents typically in Texas. That is the same at 1 a.m. as it is at 5 p.m. as it is at 9 a.m., right? Same hot, cold, high demand day, low demand day. That probably needs to change at some point. We probably need a differentiated rate structure because if you're a retailer and you want to offer net metering or just a time differentiated rate to your customer and say, hey, when power is really expensive, I want to charge you more, but have an automated system to keep that down. And when times are cheap, we're going to charge up your electric car and heat your hot water and run your pool pump and all that kind of stuff. You can only do that to a certain extent because that 4 cents doesn't move, right? So even if the power price is 1 or 2 pennies, because there's a ton of wind and solar at that time, you still have to charge 5 or 6 to your customer or eat the cost, right? Does that make sense? And so that 4 doesn't move. I have heard no discussions at the Public Utility Commission about making any kind of time differentiated rate for transmission distribution utilities. The other change I would like to see our state start to look at is a state that is a change rather that many states have made. I think we're up to a dozen or more, has started to look at something called performance-based regulation. So this is basically like the basic theory of all regulation is that all regulation is incentive regulation. The incentives for transmission and distribution utilities are to put as much cost. I'm grossly oversimplifying. This isn't totally fair to utilities, but just accept the caveat that I'm oversimplifying things right now. If your main job is to return value to your shareholders as a utility, you want to invest as much in infrastructure as you can because you get 9 or 10% on that. And 9 or 10% guaranteed rate of return is a really good deal and investors love it. And the more you put into the system, the more you make. So it kind of comes back to the why. The why of utility regulation in the beginning, in the early days, was to attract capital to it, right? We didn't have an electric system 100 years ago. So, and it was kind of speculative and it was risky. So you say, okay, we'll give you a guaranteed rate of return. Well, now all the banks want in on that, right? So capital flows to our system. We build out what the National Association of Engineering called the greatest engineering marvel of the 20th century, the electric grid, right? Think about that. More than the internet, more than the telephone, more than the computer, right? They called it the engineering marvel of the 20th century. It doesn't get built without that structure in place to attract capital. I think it's a different why right now. The goal is not only to attract capital, but to deploy capital in the most economically efficient way, in the most resilient, to build a resilient electric grid kind of a way, to integrate clean energy, to deal with climate change. There's a lot of whys, but I don't think the why, the number one why for anybody outside of utility shareholders is attracting capital and spending it in the system, right? So I think we need a fundamental change of regulation that really looks at incenting what we want more of. And that's not just more spending. That was a gross oversimplification of a really detailed topic. And anybody that wants to follow, I would recommend anybody who wants to know more about that, the Future Energy, I could drop a link, Future Energy Utility, FEUR, and reliability, something like this series that LBNL did, dives really deep into these utility incentive questions. And this is, by the way, not an anti-utility diatribe. I think actually utilities could do better. I think that they would have higher profit margins under a system like that. So this is not anti-utility, it's more pro, what are we for in our utility system of the future?
Hey, Dharma.
Yeah, Rosa.
Yeah, I saw
can
that
you
you
hear
wanted
me?
to. Yes, sir. I know you wanted to make a comment. Go ahead.
Yeah, Doug is spot on. He stole my thunder, as a matter of fact. Doug, I've been on both sides of the utility business, regulated and deregulated. And I'm still of the opinion that we need to move back to the old regulated model of doing business, for the simple reason, from a reliability perspective, putting the responsibility to a single source, and you have the existing infrastructure in different forms, in Encore, Luminant, Houston Lighting and Power, or whatever you call them. So it's not water over the bridge. We can bring it back where we missed the boat going back in time under the regulated model was that at the utility level, they didn't pay enough attention to monitoring the costs of doing business. As you pointed out, if they had kept costs in check and told the utilities that you got to stay within the bounds, and they would have put a lot of emphasis on the cost structure and made certain that the cost of unit of electricity didn't get away. That was the principal driver for pushing for deregulation, besides the gas and oil industry jumping into the fray. I still strongly feel that the market-based approach is not appropriate for an electricity business where reliability is a big focus. I'll rest my case and would appreciate your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I appreciate your thoughts and understand them, and understand that, you know, it's reasonable, intelligent people can disagree on things. I think I just disagree. I understand what you're saying, and I know there's a lot of people that agree with what you're saying. And like I said, I get it. Here's why I disagree. And there's a couple reasons. Number one, let's say we try to, you know, put the toothpaste back in the tube and fully regulate the entire electric market of Texas. There would be challenges associated with that, but it could be done. If you did that, let's say then you have full regulation and all of your power plants are perfectly winterized. You've built for, you know, uber reliability. What about the gas side? So unless you're saying we should regulate all of it, and then there's kind of a real politic thing to it. Is there any chance that we could actually fully regulate all of the oil and gas fields in the electric system of Texas? I mean, I never want to say something's not possible, but if anything's not possible, that's probably in that group, right? It's just there's a, you know, sort of a political economy here that we have to take into account, and that's not going to happen. But further, if you just back up again, kind of to the, you know, these questions of why and what should be done and these kinds of things. So let's look at a couple other examples where there are still fully regulated utilities in the United States of America. Look at Southern Company in Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia. Look at Duke in North Carolina. Like, they're doing some things around renewables and low carbon and resiliency and all that kind of stuff, but like they're not going to be at 20 gigawatts of solar by next summer. So I actually believe that markets can be quite powerful, and that competitive forces can get us some of the results that we need. And I don't think these things are in contradiction. Some basic level of regulation, strong regulation, is needed. And, you know, to come back to the restaurants, like, I don't want a centrally planned restaurant system. I like for people to be able to open up their own restaurant, and if people don't like the food, it closes down. But I want the inspection of the kitchen. And I don't want to think about that. I don't want to have to think when I walk in, were there rats in there last night? Are people washing their hands before they handle my food? I don't want to think about it. I want the government to take care of it for me, right? I think that we can have a competitive system balanced with strong regulations for things like winterization of both gas and power plants, balanced with things like, and this is where, again, I think that the public voice is so critical. What do people want out of their system? And then you want to figure out for which of those things can the market deliver it? And for which of those things do you need some base level of regulation to put a system in place that meets the needs of the system, which is another way to say meets the needs of the people. So, you know, anyway, I think that this competitive electric market has major warts and flaws that need to be addressed. We've been talking about a lot of them during this call. But I also think that it can deliver whatever your why is. I think that we can't, I don't think that the reason we had outages in February was because we have a competitive market. I think it was because our demand was off the charts and we don't have good energy efficiency programs. Gas failed, power plants were properly weatherized, even though we were told they should have been after 2011. I don't think competition was the failure. I think those were the failures. You may have a different sort of diagnosis of the problem, and that's fair. But I think those were the causes. And I think to throw out our competitive system based on February would be a mistake. And I think that the competitive system can deliver more resiliency, can deliver lower cost, can deliver cleaner. It can deliver a lot of things. I think we need to improve upon it, but not throw it out. And increase regulation. But that doesn't mean regulating rates, setting prices, making it that you can only have one electric provider. If that's what you mean by, regulation, I just disagree. But I do think we need more regulation.
Hey,
I hope that-
Dharma,
yeah.
before
Yeah,
Dharma, before
allow me-
hold
allow
on,
me-
Dharma, before I let you respond or make your comment, I'm going to say we also need to be respectful of Doug's time. Dharma, after you visit on, or after you make your comments on this last item, we're gonna take 3 more questions. I'm trying to find questions of the people who have not had a chance to have their questions asked. And then I suggest that we will let Doug go with all the questions in the chat. And that way, as he has time, if he would be willing to answer those questions, we would be extremely grateful. But I want to be respectful of his time as well. So Dharma, take it away, and then we'll have 3 more questions. Go ahead.
Rosa, what I would suggest is I would like to circle back, but to allow for other questions to be answered, why don't you go ahead and fire it away? And if Doug can stay over, I can come back with my what I would like to express.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Michael, do you want to ask the next question? Okay, I don't hear Michael. I'll ask one from Lisa Magel. She was asking if there's any prospects for residential PACE programs in Texas these days.
The short answer is, I think, unfortunately, no. Residential PACE has had some problems, to say the least, in other states. We could talk about those more. Here's what I want to say, though, because I think residential PACE is one way to finance energy efficiency and/or solar and storage. I think there's a lot of other ways. I'll drop in the chat if you're interested in residential financing. There was a great podcast I listened to recently. There was Michael Liebrick, founder of Bloomberg New Energy Finance, had with a guy named Peter Sweatman. They're both Europeans, so there's more of a Glenn, you may need to mute.
Yeah, we need to, if you're not
No problem. You're
speaking,
okay.
please
It's all right.
mute your phone.
I'm sorry.
No worries. You're fine.
Hi, this is Lissa. I was
Go ahead,
I was also asking that in the context when you were talking about how insurance companies might be requiring folks to have, winterized homes. Actually, I guess it was requiring code updates in cities. And I was thinking, oh, that's great, except that, the lower income homeowners are going to be more affected by that than higher income homeowners. And I was sort of grimacing to myself, how can you get money to the people who really need it to winterize their homes? So that I thought of PACE, and I know its prospects aren't good. So that's what I was just trying to think. How can you help the people out who will be affected as these insurance companies are putting the screws on, not wanting to incur expenses of flooding due to freezing pipes?
This is it's a huge question. And all I'm suggesting is, and again, as with everything I've said, I'm very open to being wrong. I don't think residential PACE is the answer. I think we're going to have to find other financing mechanisms, but financing is absolutely critical, and we need to figure this out. I put a link to the podcast I was talking about. I think this guy, Peter Sweatman, I'm going to reach out to him and figure out who's doing what on this in the United States, because there's huge potential for that. We should be making it easy for people to finance energy upgrades to their home, recognizing the grid value that brings and the economic value. Think of all the jobs that could be created by this. Again, what is your why? Like, whatever it is, we should be figuring out energy efficiency financing. The banks hate residential PACE. That's a blanket statement. It's oversimplified, but what PACE does is it puts the lien
ahead of them.
Yeah. So
Yes.
I mean, you're fighting a Goliath And I just don't know that
Right.
it's necessary because there's other ways to do it. That's all.
Oh,
I'm
it's
saying.
just the thing I'd heard of. I mean, I know there've been a lot of abuses of it too, people
There
overselling
have been.
programs and then people are locked into paying it on their taxes.
Correct.
So anyway, just looking for alternatives.
No,
Um,
I thank you. Thank you for the question. It's such an important one.
Doug, we've been asked by a couple people if you wouldn't mind putting your email address in the chat just so that they can have it as well.
And please, and follow me on Twitter too. I actually probably respond to direct messages on Twitter more than I do email,
Yeah.
which is probably a
Thank-
sad commentary on me, but anyway.
No, I'm like you. Dharma, you get the last statement. I think I've gone through the questions. You get the last statement.
Okay, thank you, Rosa. Doug, I want to kind of make certain that my focus is more on the reliability aspects. And having been on the regulated side of the entity, we were required to make certain that whenever someone flipped a switch, whether it was minus 20 degrees or snowing or raining, or we were required to make certain that the electricity was made available in very short order, for which we were compensated. So with that in focus, we as an individual entity was responsible for the entire chain of operation, procuring gas. And in case there was a freeze up, we had alternative approaches like having fuel oil on site as standby to produce electricity. So there were a lot of things that went into the planning process. So I would still submit that the free market approach is total confusion. You have 5 or 6 different entities, T&D, the retail providers, generators, and then the gas suppliers. To coordinate all that and leaving it to individual companies doesn't work. So if you have a central body, like in the old monopoly system, with controls, you talked about the need for regulation even in this deregulated environment. So those things are butting heads. Whereas if you had one entity and it was given some marching orders and told that you're going to work within the confines, that's going to address the reliability issue. That's where I'm coming from. So I'm very passionate about it. And we are one too many cooks, so to speak, in this, this market-based approach that can really mess things up. And we have experienced. And the energy costs have not gone down. I've looked back going to the late 90s and compared with what the energy costs are, we have not seen any savings over the long haul. There have been periods where you were able to make use of cheap electricity, but overall the trend, and one of your charts where you showed the annual electricity as a percentage of state energy, that reflects where we are in the bottom of the pyramid. And so this is an honest debate. Don't misunderstand me for what I'm trying to say. It's just countering your points, and you made some very good points. But ultimately, you also had that little bit of the regulation need on each of the different activities there. So I'm saying the old method where you had regulation, but regulated just one entity. And I don't recall going back in time when we had all these snow and tornadoes and others, where we lost a lot of lives other than electricity related. So I'll rest my case, but it was an interesting presentation. Hopefully at some point in time, I would like to, we'll cross paths, and I'm looking forward to your March meeting.
Thank you, Dharma. And I agree with you in the sense that, you know, I respect your point of view, and I know a lot of people that share it that I respect. I mentioned the Disconnect podcast, by the way. You'll really enjoy that because he does sort of, you know, that is where they kind of point the finger is the deregulation caused a lot of the problems, so I'm not unsympathetic to that point of view. I'll just say this, and then we could go ahead and end, because we've been on for a long time, and I appreciate all your attention here. I think though that I think to say that we should restructure back, we should re-regulate, we should would take a fundamental, like the diagnosis would have to be of February, if you're doing it in response to February, that the failure was a market problem. I think the failure was a regulatory problem. The three things that were cited as the biggest causes in this presentation, and I think FERC and NERC agreed with the top two. I don't know that they would agree that demand was number three, but those are all regulatory problems. We need to winterize the gas wells and associated infrastructure. We need to winterize our power plants. You can do that through a strong rule and inspection. We need to reduce demand. You can do that through regulation by increasing the energy efficiency goal the state has. It doesn't even take legislative action. The PUC increased the energy efficiency rule back in 2010 without a legislative direction to do so. PUC could do it on its own, and we could get ACEEE showed in the next 5 years, we could get 8 gigawatts of reduction for 1/2 of the amount the load serving entity obligation would cost in 1 year, not to mention the next 10 years, 20 years after that. And the cost of re-regulating, by the way, would be significant. It would be in the many, many billions of dollars. And I'm not saying we shouldn't do that. If that could save lives and save property, $100 billion lost. I was just talking about that. If you could do it for less than 100 billion, it might be worth it if you think that the problem was the market. I think the problem was regulation. So it leads me to a fundamentally different set of solutions. And I look forward, Dharma, to having that discussion with you, over coffee or beer or something one day. The last thing I want to say just about prices going down, it is true that prices in deregulated areas, they're basically flat. They go up, they go down, but basically since deregulation, roughly speaking, flat. I would point out to you though, that the cost of generation has gone down significantly. And I don't think that would have happened unless there was competition. And by the way, I don't think we would have gotten as much wind and solar as we got had there not been competition, because it's the lowest cost resource on the system. So we have seen decreases. Those decreases have been swallowed up by increases on the transmission and distribution system, mostly on the distribution side. So when we say T&D, it's transmission distribution. Most of those increases have come through distribution. So this brings me back to that point of performance-based regulation. And is our why we want to spend more money, we want to attract more capital to the distribution grid, or is our why something else? And I think if we want lower costs, again, that can be addressed a lot through regulation. The market is reducing costs on the wholesale side, and that is we can demonstrate that with data and evidence. And I look forward to continuing the discussion. And I took nothing you said in the spirit other than as you could tell, I love this. I'm still here hanging out at 12:30 on a Saturday.
Yes.
And I don't think that I'm right and you're wrong. I think these are really important questions, and I love talking about them and get smarter. Sounds like you know a lot, so I look forward to talking to you more, but in a different context probably than this meeting. And thanks everybody for staying with us so long. I've really enjoyed this. What a great group. Thank you, Rosa.
This was a phenomenal presentation, Doug. Let's all give Doug a tremendous round of applause. This was one of our best presentations in quite a while. So thank you very much, Doug. We truly appreciate it. I just wanted to let you know that the city of Dallas and NTREG over the last year have worked on resiliency hubs to bring up a blueprint for how to do that. So just so you know, we are working on those as well here in town. Thank you again very much. For everybody, our next meeting on February 12th, we're anticipating having the American Solar Energy Society bring us up to date on the DFW, on the solar tour from last year, their experiences with it, lessons learned, and how we might all have a better solar tour for 2022. So thank you again all for attending and for staying as long as you did. with this presentation. Terrific speaker, terrific presentation, terrific questions. And they will be captured on the chat and provided to Doug and see where we go from here. So thank you very much. Have a great month, and we will see you here next Saturday, February 12th, 2022. Thank you, Doug. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Russell.